morning, everybody. Breaking news. I guess it's not so breaking as it's now 13 hours old, but it's breaking because it happened while I was registering for work today, so I missed all of it. But I'll give it a minute to see who logs on very early Monday morning after the weekend to the Sunday shift, but we'll see. I'll give it that minute. People log on, great. If not, I'll just do the video. People are all going to catch it later. So Bloomberg News puts it out there that the U.S. government has concrete intel that Russia's planning a Ukraine invasion to take Ukraine back. Well, it just so happens there's one guy in this world today who crafted the legal path to independence. And I can take you through three countries today, and one major blunder by a U.S. former president by executive order. A problematic situation with the very old institution of the United States of America. Joe Biden claimed, Donald Trump made a mess of international law. And he did. He did in several areas. We can argue about good things, bad things, but when it comes to rule of law internationally or the United States Constitution, it seems presidents often try to breach the Constitution or go out on the global stage and absolutely upend international law at various times in American history. One of those such presidents is George H. Bush. It's over Ukraine. Fall of Soviet Union in 1989, subsequent granting of Ukraine independence in 1991. That was done illegally, while Russia was down on their knees. And the U.S. government, under former President George H. Bush, broke with international law. We're going to go through why that is seriously problematic and what that has done all throughout the world because of the actions of the executive power of one president in 1991 who did it to hurt Russia, former Soviet Union, in transition. He did a declaration of independence. Ukraine did a declaration of independence from the former Soviet Union, which is the Russian Federation. A declaration. That's not a vote, ladies and gentlemen. There was nothing democratic about it. A party in a multi-party system, which they have many, so there's never any kind of majority, let alone it's multiple minorities, really. This is typical of the European Union. There's lots of countries that can have upwards 10, 11 parties run, and the biggest vote percentage is 14%. With all that being said, Ukraine did not host a referendum, which is called for in international law. You must call for a referendum for independence. You must call for that and have all the people of your country vote on it, or of a region. At the time, Ukraine was a region of Russia. We can argue, but it's like the 50 states of the USA or the 10 provinces of Canada and 3 territories, and on and on and on throughout this world. Regions have power. Now, Ukraine had a constitution, and Russia held the binding international law, as does USA, France, UK, and China. And the world all agreed to it. George H. Bush broke from international binding law. He broke it. This is binding in the UN Charter. And George H. Bush, unilaterally, with his executive power alone, granted Ukraine a declaration of independence by a minority party. A minority, ladies and gentlemen. It would be like right now, NDP calling for independence of BC, and Joe Biden granting British Columbia independence from Canada, with only the NDP party declaring it and them walking away from Canada. Imagine that, ladies and gentlemen. Or Quebec. We know that's not legal in international law. We already know Canada put up a whole bunch of bullshit that's not international law on succession that they can't win on the world stage. But we're going to skip all that. We're going to focus on key countries in recent time, because for all of you to know, after the election of 2019, the Catalan government top legal experts contacted me. You will find on Twitter massive following of massive Catalonian politicians, huge followings in the millions, follow me with 200 followers. Why would they follow me unless, of course, I had the legal path to independence? So most of them were imprisoned in Spain. Spain ordered them arrested. They were thrown in jail for doing a unilateral declaration of independence. Now, I've spoken with all their legal teams. I presented the legal path to independence. They've had serious trouble trying to organize that, but that is the legal path to independence. I can show you Sudan and the legal question, and it was shaking hands to stay together or waving goodbye, because most citizens of Sudan at the time could not read and write. So they do pictorial, shake hands or wave goodbye. And guess what 99% of the population voted for? Wave goodbye. That's how they got South Sudan. Do you know who organized that referendum of independence in 2005? The UNSCP5 did, and every country in the world who held Sudanese refugees had to administer the referendum in the country. I know because I was a part of it in Edmonton, Alberta, for the Sudanese community. I was a part of that. We went through it. Everyone in my former party knows the truth. It was also done in Toronto, Canada, where the other half of the refugee citizens of the time were located. Those two communities. They got to get that question asked, and they answered. And all over the world, it was administered by the UNSCP5. A real referendum by the people, housed by the UNSCP5. Now, George H. Bush, just to spit on the former Soviet Union, to kick them when they were down, to breach their territorial boundaries, allowed a unilateral declaration of independence by a party in a minority situation and gave it to them. On the other half, Spain, Catalonians try it, and guess what happens to them? They end up in jail. Where was Donald Trump or Joe Biden during that period? Nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. So all of those people go to jail for doing what George H. Bush says is legal. Now, there's more to this, because I can promise you there are states in the United States of America that wish to go independent. It's been quelled, but the need for it is still there. And it's not the minority everybody thinks it is. Imagine if the state of Texas, parties in power, the governor, declares a declaration of independence. Will Joe Biden honor it because George H. Bush honored it for Ukraine? No, he wouldn't. Because it's illegal. It's illegal in this world. That's what George H. Bush did. Republican or not, George H. Bush broke international law, and his actions caused strife all over this world. And now Joe Biden's saying Russia's going to invade poor Ukraine, the most corrupt country you can find nearly in all of the European Union all the way to UK, almost to Greenland. In a 5,000 radius, you go around, 5,000 mile radius, you will not find a country as corrupt as Ukraine, far beyond anything measurable in the Russian Federation. I've went through all the numbers. You can't find any economist of real stature published to disagree with that statement. The people of Ukraine suffer horrible, horrible corruption and were never ever given a real, true referendum. And now USA, who caused this, I'm sorry, the truth is the truth. George H. Bush caused this. And now Joe Biden is trying to make a stink. And there's been several accusations about the Biden family involved in the corruption in the Ukraine. To put it in perspective, the corruption is over $37 billion a year. Almost as much as the equalization and federal transfers Alberta puts into Confederation. From taxation and absolutely from what they have to borrow every year, just the region of Alberta. That is done in Ukraine, the country of Ukraine, every year. No one can account for the money, though. It's not legislated or anything else. Pure and absolute 100% corruption. Massive, large scale. You can look at all these countries. I've given you a list. You can look at it. Ukraine needs to do a referendum, a legal referendum of independence. That is the only way forward if you don't want Russia to invade, just like Crimea and 3 other regions destabilized largely by the United States of America and corruption. That is a problem of the United States of America and the executive power of presidents. Sorry, but it's true. We can't side with USA against Russia. Canada can't do it. I have many, many Ukrainian friends and family, deep, strong ties, but just like the old Bjorkman, you'll find they all immigrated to Canada when Russia was an imperial country. That's right. When there was still a company called the Russian American Corporation, which was all the way down to California, all the way up through British Columbia into Alaska, all through Washington. This is truth, reality. And many, many Ukrainians came to Canada. Grassroots, first of the first settlers, just like my family. A pile of them. That is in large part the Ukrainians of Canada, who literally, none of them have any real strong ties in those generations to any communism. They never went through it. They were from Imperial Russia. Are there communist former Ukrainians here? Sure. Polish too. That's great. Congratulations. But law is law. And we don't go to war and breach international law. We don't say the Catalonians deserve to die, go to prison, and destroy their culture and heritage because they followed an illegal law, which was ruled illegal, everybody. Ruled illegal. And USA laid the foundation through that from an illegal executive order in international law by none other than George H. Bush. One of the worst presidents ever in international law. When you go back and you look at Watergate with Richard Nixon turns out to be the greatest international legal expert of any president in the history of the United States. The absolute best. Best of the best Republican in a majority. An honest Republican. And even when caught messing around with communist Democrats, he told the truth and took his lumps. Even though he had a massive majority. He held House and Senate in majority. He still did the right thing. He still did right by Americans, followed international law, absolutely secured some great things for Americans, making them wealthier than ever. And people can argue about the gold standard. I too look at that. But when you look at what America owns in this world and how wealthy Americans really are, that's the tail of the tape that comes from Richard Nixon and the works he's done. When you look at the American Indian and how well they're doing today, that's all Richard Nixon. When you look at the end of segregation, in reality, not by legislation that never had any teeth, but by the sweat and brow of a president jumping on an airplane and physically going to those southern states and standing there and opening up all the schools to all the blacks so that they could go to school with the whites in the public school system. He stood there and dared the American people to shoot him down, which no president, even though they had all the laws passed for more than 10 years, did the work Nixon did. George H. Bush is a terrible president of the past. It's sad that he was a Republican. It's sad where Democrat Joe Biden's going with Russia, when clearly the American government is absolutely at fault. And when you see the last two resolutions by Russia in a massive majority, that doesn't bode well for the United States or Americans themselves. It doesn't. It doesn't in this world. And if it means America teaming up with colonials and making Canadian lives worse in the name of, I'm not down for that. It's going to be interesting what comes of all of this. But Canadians, this is the true video. You're hearing it from somebody who's been on that stage. As you just watched Putin match me in exactly what I said 2 days ago, Putin released it yesterday. I'm going to get to the Kremlin. And what happens with Russia and the Ukraine, I have to tell you all, it's America's fault for breaching international law. They've left a wake of destruction around Europe and all over the world from the choices presidents made with their executive power. Not one, maybe they didn't understand. Two, they didn't have a good administration behind them. Or three, they just didn't care. Or maybe it's a combination of all of it. It's a weakness of the American system. It's something that the people have to look at. Thanks, that's my video this morning. Thanks all for tuning in. We'll stay tuned. We'll see what comes of Ukraine and Russia. But I gotta tell you, Russia's within their rights. That's a fact. The only way out of it is to have a real referendum by the people in the legal path to independence, as is and is in international law. The truth is, it really is. Thanks, that's my video. You'll never see another video from anybody anywhere that goes into this detailed depth besides the powers in this world today. It should be interesting. Thanks all, that's my video. Bye now.